Stuff too. Okay. All right. Well, welcome back to Teacher Talk with Paul and Jay. It's been a couple years, but we're back together and ready to go again. In 2020, hi, Jay.
Hey.
I'm just going to say hi. Yeah.
That's okay.
All right. I was just rolling along. When we started in 2020, we covered Romeo and Juliet and Hamlet and a couple one-offs. And now, after some life changes, we're back at it, doing this thing together remotely, and we're ready to tackle one of our favorite books. And that's Homer's The Odyssey. So we've got a lot of history with teaching this, and we want to share this and hopefully draw some other teachers into teaching this, and draw into hearing about how others are using this book in the classroom. So we want to jump right in tonight. And Jay, I hope, like in old times, you have brought a poem for us for tonight. Do you have something to kick off?
Thank you, Paul. It's good to be with you again. I have like the most obvious poem about Homer. It's by the great romantic poet John Keats, who, if I remember correctly, this is one of his early poems, 1816. He was in his early 20s. I wasn't writing anything like this in my early 20s, nor in my late 40s. But it's about, I think it's George Chapman, if I remember that first name correctly, the first English translator of Homer. And Keats got his hands on it and was just, wowed and awed by it. Yeah. So much so that he wrote this really amazing sonnet. And he compares reading Homer. He remembers hearing how Homer ruled Apollo's universe of poetry. And then he compares reading Homer to an astronomer seeing a new planet swim into the sky. And he compares reading Homer like an explorer discovering an ocean for the first time. And it's my favorite description of being in awe while reading a book. And I just, I love this. I love this poem. I had it memorized. I have most of it in my head, but it's a good one to know by heart.
Yeah. So
it's called On First Looking into Chapman's Homer by John Keats. Much have I traveled in the realms of gold, in many goodly states and kingdoms seen. Round many western islands have I been, which bards in fealty to Apollo hold. Oft of one wide expanse had I been told that deep-browed Homer ruled as his demesne. Yet did I never breathe its pure serene, till I heard Chapman speak out loud and bold. Then felt I like some watcher of the skies, when a new planet swims into his ken, or like stout Cortez, when with eagle eyes he stared at the Pacific, and all his men looked at each other with a wild surmise, silent upon a peak in Darien.
It's exactly what the poet calls, what Homer calls for the muse to do in him. Lift the great song again.
Yeah.
Right before he begins to play in the opening lines, he calls, sing in me muse, and through me tell the story. It's as if that's what Keats is saying, that in Chapman's Homer, the song came through loud and clear and made a place real.
Yep.
Yeah, that's nice. Yeah, that'd be worth that would be worth having in memory.
Yep.
That's good. That's a great one. That's a great one to open up on. And it's exactly the kind of thing also that we're hoping. It's a way of describing success, I think, with Homer and the Odyssey in the classroom. Yeah. If students can walk away with just a little bit of that sense with them, some sense of why and what's great about it, instead of just being able to say, well, my teacher told me it was great.
And I also think we're getting ahead of ourselves, but that's okay. That it's a reminder too that it's not simply about strict analysis. I'm all for analysis, but there's also this sense of mystery and awe in the face of something amazing. And I think he's not solving the poem here. He's in awe in front of it. And I don't know how much we discuss this in education, but everybody that's listening, that's a passionate reader, has had that feeling where you just think, wow, that's amazing. And you don't necessarily even know what's going on. You just stand before a book for amazed. So it's not like Keats couldn't write a thesis paper on the Odyssey. I'm pretty sure he could, but that's not how he read it. So anyway, without getting down that rabbit hole, I think that's a good reminder that there's a lot of different things that happen in us when we read a book, and it isn't just like a particular kind of thinking. It happens in all parts of us.
Well, yeah, and I don't think that's too much of a rabbit trail, really, to start with our first of the two sort of questions I want to address tonight. And the first one is really for us to talk about how we've taught the Odyssey over the years, like who you've taught it to, specifically how you describe that, and then how you've taught it. And I think that touches on what you said. Is it something, you're looking up scholars on, you're Googling questions, you're getting sort of, solving the mystery or unraveling the puzzle, or is there some approach to it that is this sort of stand back? So maybe let's start with that. Who do you teach this to?
Yeah, so we have level classes, as you know, and I have, frankly, the kids who have historically struggled, ninth graders who historically struggle for a variety of reasons. Some kids it's a maturity thing. Some kids, they're learning English. Some kids have a language processing challenge or a serious attention challenge. One of my hardest working kids I have this year is extremely dyslexic, but he just works really hard and he listens to the audiobook and he annotates. And so, as you and I have often discussed, there's the book, but I mean, I think the best teachers think first, okay, who are my students? Right. What are their gifts? What are their challenges as they exist right now? And how do I marry what I love with the students that I'm obligated to teach? And the times where I've been the worst teacher is when I get so excited about the book that I forget who the students are. That to me, I mean, as complicated as Homer is, each individual human we teach is infinitely more complicated, and there might be 40 of them in 2 classes. So, but that's, as you and I have discussed, that's part of the fun. So I teach ninth graders that struggle. I've done this with a variety of varied degrees of success over the years. And I think one of the most important things is I didn't study classics, and I know you didn't either. No. And I think some English teachers are a bit tentative with something like Homer or Oedipus because it isn't in our purview. We didn't go to college reading and discussing this like we did with Shakespeare and Dickens and Austen and Thoreau. So I do think I journaled a little bit today in preparation for this. I do think this is not only a different kind of work for our students, but I think it requires a different kind of work for English teachers who studied English. But I think I just think it's good to acknowledge that,
Yes. Right. And then
for us too.
And then what? I'm sorry, what'd you say?
Venture for us too. And there's if you're interested in your resources between podcasts and YouTube videos and audiobooks books themselves, I mean, there's just so many places to go to get guidance. It's almost overwhelming.
Yes, it is. It is. But I've always thought of this saying, something like, I don't know where this came from, something like wherever you look for something, that's where you find it. Yeah. And if you look, it's great to use resources, podcasts and, all sorts of things. But I always found, and it's true for me, when I do that, that's where that information stays, or that's where that book lives. It's kind of a function of the things I've researched. And I have to say, for the Odyssey, I looked in the front of my copy, which I've used over and over and over. It says 2007, CCA freshman English, north of Boston. And that's when I think that might be the first year I taught it. Maybe 2007, 2006, somewhere in there. And from that day, I sort of determined, and I've held to this pretty much 100%, really until the last year or two. I've stayed in the book. There are questions that I have right now that I have purposed not to Google. I like the book so well, and I like thinking about and being stuck on a problem. It's a great kind of pleasure to keep going back to the book to find the answer. And I guess I want to say, to tie into what you're saying, that as English teachers, I have found great success in almost sort of willfully, naively just approaching the book with the skills I have, the interests I have as a reader, as a teacher, as a human being, and sort of asking my students to do the same thing, to follow with me down that Odyssey. Sort of like, the explorer exploring the new world in the Keats poem. He's not a geographer, he's not a geologist. He doesn't know exactly what he's looking at, but that does nothing for his sense of wonder in the sense of discovery, in the moment of confrontation,
Yeah.
But I just want to verify. I mean, I want to emphasize you've not taught. This is not like a top tier. You wouldn't describe this as you only save this for your honors classes or your AP classes or something like that. Correct?
It's a book that I think almost all of our freshman teachers teach, and the freshmen I have had for the last several years have been, as you know, I teach AP seniors, and one of the pleasures of my job, I just love this, is that I teach AP seniors who are actually within their APness are diverse. And then the college prep guys within their college prepness are also diverse. They're not all one thing with one challenge. But anyway, a lot of my college prep year is building their reading comprehension and fluency. So there's like 4 modern novels of a wide variety of styles, but books that they can read because they struggle reading. And I do a deep dive with Romeo and Juliet and deep dive with the Odyssey. And I think it's a good combination for them to get some confidence, and then also a different kind of confidence reading something like this. In terms of how I go doing it during and after COVID, I sort of built up some digital resources just because we weren't with them all the time, and it was just weird. And I wanted to still teach these books. So I have about a 60 video playlist on YouTube of Odyssey videos, and the brunt of them are like a 15-minute preview to each book, and then just me reading the book. So, we had some maintenance issues at school, so we're remote the next few days. I'm going to do this on Zoom, but if a kid is ever absent, he can go on YouTube and be like, okay, here's Mr. Pollock's like intro to book 4.
Right.
And then if he doesn't have the money for the Audible thing, like he reads it. So admittedly, they need a bit more scaffolding before the reading experience for them not to be completely flummoxed by it. Right. But it's a balancing act, because I respect what you're saying, that you don't want to spoon feed the entire thing. What I generally do is try to smooth over bits where being lost would be frustrating and kind of neat.
Yes.
Because I just think that's like, teaching. So,
right.
Which I think is why I have health insurance. So that's a good thing. But I think you point out a really key thing with difficult books is when to handhold, and then when, because frankly, I mean, it's not the Wild West. Like, we don't just hand them books and say good luck and meet them again in a month. And I know you don't do that. So it's fascinating. Like, those of you who are listening or in education know, teachers don't ever go to workshops about this. We go to all kinds of workshops, many of which are valuable, some of which are comically not valuable. Yeah. But it's never that nitty gritty. How much information and guidance do you give a kid when you read a difficult book? Like, that's an elemental piece of an elemental conversation that I don't really know how often I've had. So we're going to be having this throughout. But what I do is, if I'm doing, say, book 3 of the Odyssey, I will live for about 20 minutes preview book 3, particularly in the early stage where they're still getting acclimatized. Later on, less of it. You know what I mean? But early stage. So 15, 20 minutes. And that's heavily including reading key passages out loud, making sure they know who's talking. Sometimes when there's like a story within a story and it's hard. So, So when we then sit to read and annotate book 3 and all their phones are on their desks. And it's just training them to be still with a book for 20 minutes, which I think is one of the gifts this book can give, a habitual sort of version of that. When they sit and listen to book 3, all they have is a pen in the book, but they've already sort of marked some things and they already have a sense of some of the issues. So I think in the early stages, that's for at least for my students, that's really helpful to make them feel competent with the book.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Even doing that, there's going to be all kinds of things I don't get to that,
Right. But there's so many things. Everything is in this book. Everything. And so do you get to everything? No. If you get to 5 things, take those 5. Be thrilled.
Yeah.
They're going to be good things, and it's fine. Don't try to do everything. Totally. I totally agree. And that whole, that thing. And I too have taught it at each level, in 3 different schools now. And so, students, grouped or tracked however they are, but I've tried it with those who, for whom reading is the most difficult in the school, and, done it with those who are, who have a habit of just plowing through books in classes. And I do find that I am able to draw students into the text, and that not everyone loves it, but a lot of students, against their best predictions, get into the book, really find what's compelling about Odysseus or Telemachus or the gods even, and latch onto things. But I totally agree, Jay. There at the front end, there is a lot of hand holding, and I think that thing you mentioned of stories within stories, I always describe it to students as like you're going down the path with Homer. You're on the interstate, and then all of a sudden he takes an exit, and wants to go get some cheese doodles and take a break, and you have no idea he's taking an exit. There's no announcement, there's no blinker. He's just on a different road all of a sudden, and you're like, wait a minute, where are we? And he's off, and you don't even know you've taken an exit. Yeah. And then he re-ramps back on. And you're like, oh yeah, we're back on the main journey. But that happens, and students just get confused, and they'll just quit. They will just give up and quit. And you're like, I can't even follow this. I mean, and so, yes, they got to get used to it. They've got to get used to the writing, the style, the narrative sort of weave,
Yeah. And I think for me, and I think you and I are similar in this, I don't give a lot of what color are Odysseus's drapes kind of quizzes. I think that, think the fact that I read the book, we're reading it in class, like they're reading it. I'm physically right next to them during the process. So I don't have to. That's not a mystery to me. So what I do give them often is maybe a couple of quotes, like who says this, just to make sure they're paying attention. But a lot of the stuff I'll ask is like, what was the most surprising choice in yesterday's chapter? And that way there's wiggle room, and they have to use a quote, and they just start thinking. And it's subjective reader response, but they can latch on to sort of anything that stands out. So it's worth it,
Yes. Yeah. I like that. And I like too hearing them, I did that one summer, that Harkness training at Phillips Exeter Academy, a kind of Socratic, discussion model thing that they do. And I used, some versions of that. What's great about it is that you set the room up in such a way that you can essentially sit back and listen to them. And so you as a teacher are sort of furiously taking notes about what they say, not to see if they have the right answer or not, but to find out, what are they getting? What actually stands out? What do they think is going on? What has landed for them, and where are they completely lost? And then that gives you this raw material to deal with, to figure out how you need to supplement or to help. So I like listening. It's a little bit of a mystery, each year. That's kind of the surprise, part that makes it really fun, because I know the story, but I don't know exactly what they're going to catch and where they're going to get lost. So, so I like that too, of it's kind of almost like running a sounding, just pinging them and figuring out where they are, and listening closely to what comes back, what comes back to you. And if you can make students comfortable with each other, comfortable in the class enough, so they'll be honest and just say exactly where they're lost and exactly what they think is going on, then it can be, it can be a profitable experience.
Yeah.
Well, let's move. Sorry, go ahead.
We were wondering about is, and it seems self-evident, and it's no longer self-evident. Why teach the Odyssey?
Yeah.
How do we make sense of it? What do students get out of it? And I want to say, because of what I said earlier, that most English teachers don't know ancient Greek, and I mean, if they read it, they maybe read it when they were 14 quickly. Yeah. That doesn't mean that's not the same thing as reading it in graduate school. So I just think, what if for all of us that are teachers listening, all of us have to teach books that we don't love? I mean, unless you're, homeschooling your kid and you can choose everything. Yeah. And to be honest, I think, without sounding like sadistic, I think, it puts us in the place of a kid having to read a book that he doesn't love. It's not a bad thing. So I think sometimes the experience for kids with writers like Homer and Shakespeare is like, it's sort of like intellectual medicine, like poetic castor oil, like take this, it's good for you. And that's just going to kill it. Like, I'd rather have them not even read it ever with teachers that don't love it. And let's face it, there's a lot of teachers who don't love anything before 1950, but they're forced to teach it, and it's just awful. And I'm not demeaning them. It's just, so I think one of the functions of really great literary criticism, and you and I have chatted about that. There's this great book by Dan Mendelsohn, who's a classicist at Bard, and he has a memoir called, I think it's called like The Odyssey, a Father and a Son and an Epic, but his 80-year-old like World War II vet dad audits his Odyssey class at Bard. So it's like his dad and a bunch of 19-year-olds. So the first half of the book is like reading the Odyssey with his dad. And then the second half of the book is learning about his dad when they go on an Odyssey-themed cruise in Europe. But there's amazing stuff. This guy's a classics professor at the university level, and he's great. And there's a zillion places to go. To me, one of the greatest functions of reading things like that isn't necessarily that I'm bringing lots of that to the classroom, but if I don't love a book, the way to maybe fall in love with it is to surround myself with people that love it. And if I don't have people like that at my school, I can find books and YouTube lectures and podcasts, maybe like yours and mine.
Yes.
To surround myself with virtual people who love it. Because the fact of the matter is, it's not fair to our students if we teach something through gritted teeth. And the fact of the matter is, like I hate Wuthering Heights with a passion. If an earthquake opened up in the middle of that book and swallowed everybody, I'd be tickled pink. If I had to teach it, I would dedicate a lot of time to finding Victorian scholars and YouTube videos and rereading the book a lot to fall in love with it enough to be a good teacher of that book. Because I think that's only fair. So I think it's good to be honest that you and I are a little weird. I think that's fair to say. I think at
least one of us here, one of us is, pretty weird, I'd say.
Pretty weird. And I am too. But I just think that's really, like, to be perfectly honest, a lot of teachers teaching this book don't like it. Let's just address that.
Yeah, a lot of them strip it down. They strip it down for parts, don't they? They
just 4 and then the monsters in book 9 at the end.
Yeah, right, right. Done.
That's
maybe book 11 if you're feeling really zesty. Go to the underworld and see the dead or something. But what do we do with that? What is that about? It's perilous, so skip it. Yeah, I don't like it. I totally agree. I don't like it at all. I was looking at I had some translations I sort of piled, just sort of inconspicuously in the back. There's the Emily Wilson book, which is a great book too. I have to say I've taught this one as well as you have. I mean, I tend to go for the Fitzgerald. I just love the poetry of this, of this translation. But the Emily Wilson was a great pleasure to teach. I've never read. I have a translation by T.E. Lawrence or Shaw, Lawrence of Arabia. Did you know he did a translation of this thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, he says some really nice things, some really, really nice things about this book. He says the Odyssey, by its ease and interest, remains the oldest book worth reading for its story. And that's in his introduction, just for the plot, for the story. He calls it, the first novel of Europe. And he says the nice line, it's gay, it's fine and vivid. It's never huge, never terrible. And I thought it was kind of a nice line. You think of this huge epic and it's big and overwhelming, and I think I know what he means by that. Every little moment is just this tiny, very digestible moment, scene by scene by scene. And everyone, who's read it can think of those little one-off scenes, those little, Nausicaa, the Nausicaa scene, overwhelming, tiny little scene in this book, but I mean, overwhelmingly poignant. Argos, the dog, overwhelmingly poignant, a tiny apparently throwaway scene. And there's, over and over and over, there are those little moments. I think sorry, go ahead.
Connected to what you're saying, in Aristotle's Poetics, he makes the point that in a great, work of literature, in plays he was talking about mainly, one of the ways you could tell it's great, and we know this just from Netflix shows. You don't have to talk about the Odyssey, but you take one sliver out and it falls apart. Like all the pieces are necessary.
Yeah,
I mean, the Argos thing and the Nausicaa thing resonate to much larger issues. I mean, the much larger issues. So, like a kid reading this for the first time could be like, okay, why are we doing laundry now? Why is there a dog? Why is it? But
right.
then that's the question you ask. Yes, why are we doing laundry? Why is this girl here talking this way to this guy, and why is he hiding? Like deal with it, right?
Right, right. But it just telescopes, the plot just telescopes in and out. I mean, you're dealing with the biggest things ever, fighting the gods and traveling to, I don't know what the underworld thing means exactly. That's one of my questions I refuse to Google, which is that he supposedly goes to the underworld to find out how to get home. Yeah. He doesn't find out how to get home in the underworld. Tiresias doesn't tell him. He finds out the next night. Up on land, he gets all the details from Circe. Look out for, the Scylla, be careful of the Charybdis over here, take a left, after the old barn that burned down 6 years ago. That he gets all those instructions from her. How come he doesn't get them? I thought she said he had to go to the underworld to get that information.
I can't wait to talk about this chapter. It's my favorite chapter in the book.
Yeah. I can't wait. I can't wait to get there. But that, just as as an example, there are these small things, but it draws you in because each of Odysseus is not in the story is not too big for any of those moments. In that moment doing laundry, he is 110% there, just like he is eyeball to eyeball with the blind prophet in hell. Which is what you might think the book is full of, and it's just and it's just not. But I think for me, I can get to places. The thing that I think that I can get to with students, in this book are the things that I think are really worth doing. And I was, reminded of some of the lines ring in my head of that, that there's that Faulkner Nobel Prize winning speech that he gave in 1950, whatever, I think it was, where he talks about, the old verities of the heart, of compassion. I wrote them down, he lists these things in there, compassion and sacrifice, endurance and courage, honor and hope, pride and pity, love, problems of the human heart in conflict with itself, and this is a book that can get that can get you there. And not that there aren't great modern and contemporary books that do this, but a lot of times when you're in your own time, you get confused. You think the conflicts that the people are talking about are the thing. Maybe it's a racial conflict, and so you think the real issue is the historical racial conflict, which was real, or you think it's it's a class thing or something. But what Faulkner says is the real thing is the thing beneath the thing, the thing way down further, like Jim says in Huck's Finn. And it's the thing inside the thing. And it's hard to see that. It's hard to get that when you're in your own, your own time, in your own language. And I think the Odyssey, since I think it can help students to latch onto that and see that the real struggle. And man, if it wasn't, Odysseus' struggle is primarily an internal struggle with himself, played out in the world, but in his own heart. And I think you can see that there. And that's a pretty lofty, grand thing to bring to ninth graders, but it's not too much. It's a version of what you were saying before, Jay. Like, I don't want to, I don't know. I don't want to teach a book unless there's something really strong in it to bring to the students. I guess I don't want to condescend to them in any way. I'd rather push them, the other direction. just a little, just a tiny bit. And I think the Odyssey does a good job at drawing us in.
I mean, for some of my students, Paul, a book written, a young adult fiction book actually pushes them. I mean, some of them really struggle early on.
Yeah.
So the notion of what pushes them depends on who's in front of you.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
I mean? That's why I never do this book first. I need to build some skills.
Oh, yeah.
So that when I hand them and say, we're going to read all of it, they don't dissolve into putty. And they don't. This year, my kids are like weirdly excited. We're on book 4 right now. And they're like, I'll share some of the things that have been said in class.
Yeah, I'd like to hear that.
But
there's a lot of students I have who struggle in different ways. There are those who struggle essentially with, I guess, decoding, like being able to basically read. But behind that inability to read is this whole other imagination, this whole other moral imagination, this whole other interest in ideas that they're, that they have a capacity for that's not represented in their ability to read. So even a book like the Odyssey can put stuff in front of them that they can really chew on and that they want to chew on. And I'm happy to help them get through the medium of the words and the language, the chapters, in order to feed them this stuff that they love to have and love to comment on, and know the right answer to. And especially when you're talking, the other thing I wanted to mention, I thought this is something we can talk about too, but, and maybe this is something to close out on. But just the issue, the issue of the gods. I love this thing that the gods are such a big part of this story, and I'm always pushing my students to talk about that in some way, in whatever way they want to. But it's interesting,
it is.
Is that something you make something of?
Yeah. I mean, I actually bring in Plato's Euthyphro, which I think presents the heart of why it's difficult being in this world, because piety is impossible because the gods are in discord. Socrates gets Euthyphro to admit that. So it's an inherently frustrating theological landscape where you can't win. The minute you're pious to Poseidon, you're aggravating Athena. There's no such thing as real consistent piety. It's a very fickle, inconsistent, you're constantly on eggshells kind of world, and I think, frankly, that's how a lot of people feel anyway right now. That's how people feel very frequently. I wrote some things. We were talking about what students can get out of this.
Yes.
And I the landscape of why teach this big old difficult book by, a dead white guy. I think like a lot of the best books, any issue that's of contemporary relevance that we obsess over lives inside this book. But I think number one is reading confidence.
Okay.
If a kid in my class having struggled reading, but he experiences this and writes some things and talks about it in a class and has it annotated and has that experience, I'm not saying he's going to love it and become a Homeric scholar, but I think there's a value. Second is it's probably for a lot of them their first layered, complicated book. Third is that it's, and I want to talk about some specific examples of this recently, but it can introduce kids in a very powerful way to the notion that very old books are peculiarly familiar and also peculiarly foreign also. And I think the best reading, whether it's a contemporary novel or this, the whole windows mirrors thing, like it's good to see yourself reflected, and it's also good entering a completely foreign landscape. It's both. I also think it's an introduction to moral complexity, which, is a bit abstract, but I think Odysseus is the first significant character in Western literature that's neither villain or hero, and that they get to see what brokenness does to a person. And I think it really resists binary interpretations. And we have to ask questions like, what should I think of somebody whose survival of war trauma is completely heroic, but also leads him to raping and pillaging and murdering countless innocent people, which is decidedly unheroic. So what do we do with that? How do we judge suitors who are being slimy and awful and using Odysseus's stuff? But it completely makes sense that one of them wants to be the king because that'll keep the community safer. And Odysseus literally isn't there. They don't have a copy of the poem. They don't know where he is.
Yeah.
So
right? They're not wrong that somebody needs to be in charge.
Yeah. So I think it introduces students to that idea of a sort of moral moral complexity. And I just think there's some questions, and you were dealing with this with the gods. Some questions like, can I be more than one person? Do I ever really know anybody else, even the people closest to me? What are ways that I deal with pain and trauma? How do I recognize forces larger than myself, like fate or God's will, along with the choices I seem to be making? A big thing that Emily Wilson does that no other translator comes close to doing is addressing the notion of xenia or hospitality, which is largely the heartbeat of the entire epic, is how strangers
I agree.
are treated. And the word for immigrant is their word for strangers, xenia, which connects to Zeus. That's why he really desperately cares how you treat strangers.
Right. I think that topic alone, and I'm sure we'll talk about that more, but there's almost the whole moral universe is in that topic. You can get almost everywhere you need to go with your moral questions from that issue of hospitality. Yeah. There's so much in what's in the character's souls, in that confrontation with the immigrant or with the stranger on the street, the person you could take advantage of if you wanted to. It's great.
But right before we're finished, I just have a short quotation to read, but I didn't want to cut you off.
No. Go ahead.
So this is how Emily Wilson ends her introduction, her translator's note. And I'd like to offer it as an invitation to anybody listening to read this poem with us. And it's her invitation to read it also. She says, "There's a stranger outside your house. He is old, ragged, and dirty. He's tired. He's been wandering, homeless, for a long time. Perhaps many years. Invite him inside. You do not know his name. He may be a thief. He may be a murderer. He may be a god. He may remind you of what your husband, he may remind you of your husband, your father, or yourself. Do not ask questions. Wait. Let him sit in a comfortable chair and warm himself beside your fire. Bring him some food, the best you have, and a cup of wine. Let him eat and drink until he's satisfied. Be patient. When he's finished, he'll tell his story. Listen carefully. It may not be as you suspect." And I'd like to say, for those who have read it maybe a long time ago, but you want to revisit it, it's not going to be what you expect. And if you've never read it, I guarantee you it's not going to be what you expect. And that's part of the excitement of reading this.
Yeah. It's so surprising. That's a great invitation. It's an invitation.
Isn't that great?
It is great. It's fantastic. It's a personal invitation in your own life. You should probably act out literally, but it's also an invitation to the book. The book is the stranger, and invite it in, give it a place of honor, give it a chance. Let it talk to you. Let it reveal itself to you. It'll be a transformative experience for you. And that I think has been our experience of the book, absolutely, over and over and over. And I think getting in there, sitting alongside my students, I read with them, as I know you do, Jay. I literally sit beside them in the little chairs and desks and read along with them. I write along with them as well. If I do a journal entry prompt, I don't write all of them, but I do sit and write many of them with them and take it on. And I write it again for the first time. And if they want to hear it and ask to read mine, I'll read it out. And, they don't all come out that well either. But that sort of shoulder to shoulder to dig in with them is communicates to them in a different way that you really believe there's something in this. So much so that I'm willing to jump into that again, and I always am. And I don't just say that. It's just not true with every book. But this book really does give and give. And I went through a whole period where it's embarrassing to say, but I kind of wanted to be Odysseus. I thought if I could grow up and be like Odysseus, I found his moral complexity absolutely alluring, and in the identity that I thought he was trying to hammer out and build, which is by no means known ahead of time, by no means clear and understandable from the start. And it's obviously not even to himself as he's going along. I was like, wow, I want to be that guy. So
you're much nicer. You're much nicer.
I haven't killed very many people at all either. I'm way behind,
I'm way behind. The body count's not nearly there.
No. That's a prerequisite. Well, that might be enough, to start off with, to kick off this, this journey. And we'll have to promise not to use the journey/Odyssey metaphor too much as we go along.
Oh, I know.
But it's a great, but it just works. And maybe that's an opening. So something about who we've taught it to. Maybe you're surprised to learn that, I always read almost the entire book. There have been a few occasions, like Jay, I think you've mentioned, when you take stock of who's in front of you, that sometimes you may need to sort of either skip through something or skip around something, but I almost never do that. I read the whole book, and it's not with my A++ers either.
Right.
It's with students who need, because I think they can learn and grow and get from it. So that's the first thing. The second thing, what's in it? I mean, you heard us both, talk about some of those things, and we'll need to dig into the details. And I think it will come out more as we go book by book. So there's 24 books in this thing. The plot is awesome. That's a whole other. It almost seems postmodern. I mean, another thing that may be surprising to you is this plot is insane.
Well, it's considered the first science fiction novel by many people.
Really? I never heard that before.
Yeah, I mean, like fantasy, sci-fi. If you think of the landscapes and the characters, the other.
Oh yeah. Okay, right. I always thought of it the other way around. Sci-fi were just adapting the Odyssey.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah,
everything's the Odyssey after the
Odyssey is in your face spinoff, right?
Yeah. But the plot doesn't move like you expect. It's not a straight chronological arranged plot. And you get two threads going at the same time, and then they're beautifully woven back together. And then I've read analysis where they talk about these ring structures, within the plots, which I'm sure are there. I never quite got those just from my own, cold reading. But if you lay out on the board, the plot of the story, for your students, which is worth doing, it is not a straight line, and it's not one line either.
No.
So,
and some of it makes no sense, and there's no consistency, and people do things that, and the other thing, we can go on, but who to believe at any given point is, Odysseus is the most famous liar in all of literature. So that's why whenever, and you're not doing this, but when, like in the 18th century made moral sort of frameworks out of a lot of things that weren't really moral. They just tried to make moral guidebooks out of everything. So Pope's first two lines, well, no, I'm going to get to this when we do book one. But if you read Dryden or Pope, it's Odysseus is like the great moral man. I mean, you have to really read creatively to see him as a moral person. Like, you would not want your daughter marrying him. I don't even know if you'd want to invite him over for like a holiday. Like, there's a lot to admire, but I mean, you have to really skip over some parts to like him to that degree.
I don't know, Jay. I know what you're talking about, but there's that other side of the coin. Remember, I wanted to be this guy for a long time, too. So I know.
Yeah,
I know what you're talking about.
This is gonna be good. I think the one thing you and I have in common is we love living inside this book with kids.
Yeah.
And I think, and just for those who are listening, Paul and I will not rush through this. I think because we could do
understatement of the night.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't think it's only going to be one podcast per chapter. I think we'll pause along the way and collect ourselves. Like, I really believe that, and I think that's great.
Right,
I think it's great.
Right. No, it is, and you're right. And there's some important moments, we're going to have to, pause on. I think that book 11 is one of them I can think of off the top of my head. So, all right, Jay. Well, hey, that's an opener right there, and that's a great cold start to this book. I'm happy to jump back into it with you. I'm happy to be back on the podcast with you, and I look forward to getting some listeners and readers together with us to walk with us through this great text.
Yeah, so, I'm with you, Paul. Good seeing you. Good talking to you.
Hey, yeah, good seeing you too. Good talking, and I'll see you again soon.
All right, see you, buddy.
All righty, bye.
Bye-bye.